all. I hope you can hear me. Sometimes this doesn't work, but anyways. Okay, so fear is pretty common thing, right? But astrologically speaking, it's usually tied to Saturn. Typically, there are other planets that talk about fear. But Saturn is the big one because Saturn is about limits, right? Saturn is conservation, limits, boundaries. It's also about karma, but karma in a way that is like, if you don't make a certain choice, this is what will happen. So what happened today was I was yes, I was doing some reading. I was like, I've been practicing mediumship. If you guys are aware of Suzanne Giesman, it's awesome. Did some reading today, got a session, and I had to do some smudging because I was like, I thank the spirits. So I got some things in. It was interesting because I was like, the vision, the pictures in my head, or the things that come through are actually just those things. It's making sense now. So it's like, that was like I would say for me, like a nugget, golden nugget, because it's like, oh, they're not just there. It's like, oh, interesting. But anyways, so having done that, I feel kind of more energized in a different way to talk about fear. So again, so Saturn is about fear. But I was watching before the session, the reason I mentioned the reading that I had said was because there was a session the reason I mentioned the session is because before that, an hour before that, I was watching this video by Aaron Doughty, for those who don't know. He was talking about fears, and it got me thinking as I was watching the video that I took notes on it because I thought I might forget it. So I wrote down here that Saturn is about Saturnian limit specifically is that so that we have that so that we can find unlimitedness, right? So it's kind of like in medical astrology, Saturn rules the skin, bones, and also the knees. But for the notes I took here, I wrote down that it's like the skin and bones, right? So the limits. It's formed. We had skin. We developed skin. We had bones because if you look at it from an evolutionary perspective, biologically speaking, we evolved. We didn't have actual skin before, right? It was like, but at the same time, like if you look at the cells, they have boundaries. There's like a wall, right? That in itself is Saturn. That in itself is part of reality that is. There's a reason why there are boundaries, right? So, but for us humans, so that you guys are kind of like, I wanted to share with you so that it's kind of more so that you understand a little bit more about what I'm saying, is that we need to experience the three worlds through form, right? Matthias de Stefano talks about the reason why the only way the universe really has fun, or the way I understand it in my words, is that the way the universe has fun is to create limits. Because if you don't have limits, how do you know what the unlimited is, right? So it's to experience this world. In other words, not only to experience, but to learn from it, right? Saturn is actually also referred to as the teacher. It's funny, right? It's all ties together. So otherwise, though, being of light, meaning, higher elevations, meaning like our source, from God's source, creator, whatever you want to call it, or universe, being of light such as that will not know of anything like of itself, because light would not know itself. So therefore, do you see what I mean? So it needs to have darkness. It needs to understand that darkness. And in this case, it's not literal. It could be literal. But right, think about it like the void, the source of where it was. We think of it as like from our perspective that it's like the void, meaning like empty, or I think as Deepak Chopra mentioned, he mentioned one time that it's the quantum vacuum, he talks about the quantum vacuum as this place of where everything started. So to me, that feels like the void, right? So it's without light. And it's very, like, I don't know. Maybe that has something to do also with like black holes and galaxies and quasars or something like that. I'm not sure. But either way, the point is that Saturn is a reality and fear is a reality. And so when I was watching the video, I also got to learn more about things. I got these downloads. It was like, oh, okay, so Saturn, okay, obviously it's Saturn, but what else? What else? So it's also like the knees, because Saturn rules the knees. So think about it as like, knees is like movement, right? But what do the knees do specifically? It's not just movement, because those are more tied with like the muscles. So like the knees though, like Saturn, it's about, do you choose to move? So it's about movement or lack thereof. So it's like the joints. A knee is a joint, right? Like this one is a joint. The elbows are a joint. The wrists are joints. The joints of your fingers, like the knuckles. No, this is the knuckles, sorry. The joints, all joints. But they're all kind of, the reason why I believe Saturn rules the knees, specifically because you could choose to go further or not. Right? The analogy or the symbolism behind Saturn and movement on whether to expand beyond that. And Aaron Doughty actually mentions, he talks about how moving forward, basically. So what that means is like, we can how did you say it? We cannot expand our identity if we don't move past fear, or something like that, right? So it's like, again, like through evolution. So the calcification process, right? So when we do nothing, it remains in the box, then we don't get to explore. So calcification means, like, if you don't know this calcification is like creation of matter. It starts to crystallization. Calcifications are also that's Saturnian as well. So anything that's Saturnian, anything to do with creating matter, form, that is Saturn. Right? So when we do nothing, it's like, still waters. It eventually starts to harden. It starts to, But even when water's moving, like, it creates crystals, right? In a way, that's still that. One little funny example, and you're probably going to laugh at this. I have this habit of trying to save water. And this is a Saturnian thing as well, saving, conserving, right? So what I still do today is I'm just going to be honest here. I don't pee in the bathroom often. What I do is I pee in a specific like container. And what that does is it conserves water. I guess it's just become a habit, and I don't know. But I noticed that when I used to do it more extremely, inside these like containers, they're actually old bleach containers. And what happened was, the bottom, there's a layer of it that started to crystallize. And then there was this one point where it got so crystallized that it literally looked like crystals. Like, I don't know if you look it up. You look up uric acid or something. Look up the crystallization of that. You'll see. It's amazing, and funny, in my case. So, anyways, yeah. So going back to the whole crystallization thing, when you do nothing, it's like becomes like it crystallizes, calcifies, whatever it is, right? But similarly with water. When water becomes still, like literally still, like for example, like it's kind of tied in more with Pluto, but similar because it's boundaries. So bacteria forms, right? So therefore, illness, but rather not so much illness, but like dis-ease. So if you look at the analogy of Saturn related to dis-ease, it could be disease, yes, but it's both Pluto and Saturn. They're kind of similar that way. But basically, it's that disconnection. It's really the disconnection, dis-ease, because The ease comes from Jupiter, which is like expansion, optimism. It's the opposite, kind of the opposite of Saturn. They both work in that regard, right? So in other words, just connection from life, from flowing, from abundance, from source, from love, expansion. That's Jupiter. When Saturn is there, Saturn is that part of us. But again, watching the video, he talks about many other things. So I wrote here that yes, fear stops us because we also, I'm going to say, get to stop. What I mean by that is like it's an opportunity to process. It's an opportunity to internalize, embody, matter, physical. That's also, right? That's why Saturn rules the skin, rules bones. It's embodying it, right? You're kind of putting it in a container. Containers are also Saturnian thing, okay? So it's interesting, right? And Aaron also said that he said in his video, he said expanding a sense of identity. I mentioned that earlier, which to me means that Saturn is it's going beyond Saturn. So like I said a few seconds earlier, or a minute earlier, that expansion of Jupiter can remain stagnant with either the Saturnian limits and fears or Saturn's lessons and processing. That's why Saturn is both karma and teaching, or rather, he's a teacher, right? So basically, is it comfort or discomfort, right? There's a polarity. There's always a polarity in this dimension. This is, when I say this, I don't mean, now I understand it a lot more. Thank you, Matthias Stefano. He said that it's the dimensions are not actually places, it's perception. So it makes sense, right? So our perception of the 3D perception is that we have polarities. There's always duality. It's a perception of duality, right? So he says fear doesn't go away, right? And when we break free, which I now will say is Uranus, we feel free, right? Uranus represents freedom, represents shaking foundations, which is Saturn. Breaking free, so revolutions as well, rebellion, changes, actually sudden changes, because it's like Saturn is like, think of it like an earth that's kind of like stabilized, and all of a sudden there's this, that's why earthquakes, that's why Uranus rules earthquakes as well, and just electricity as well, of course. But here's the thing, how do we go from Saturn to Uranus? Meaning, how do we go from that what we feel is comfort, but really it's fear, into what we perceive as discomfort, but really is freedom? We look into Chiron, at least from a basic astrological point of view. I wouldn't say basic, but Chiron is that one. Chiron is actually in between that. Chiron can be seen as the in-betweener, okay, between fear and freedom, right? Because fear stems from this identification of ego. So, but that is an unhealthy ego, okay, because of form. Because Saturn is if you look at it from the connection of all the planets, everything is connected, right? So if you look at the sun as the ego, right, it can go either way. It can be healthy or unhealthy, or can there be a flow, especially with its symbolism of the human condition and conditioning of perception, that we live in a 3D world only, like literally only. So that fear is that Saturn fear, which is like form, identification of form. Sun is identity, identification of form. That's why in the past, in traditional astrology, you have Saturn is like the limits, right? People were only able to see Saturn and not beyond, because that was a perception that tied in with the perception of those times. But a healthy ego goes beyond that, realizing that form does have its purpose, but then we have to actually accept and surrender and utilize, or what I put in here, repurpose So that's Chiron. Chiron is planet of integration, integrating what's already there. So that means isn't that part of repurposing? You make use of something, but that's already part of you. It's shadow related as well, right? So Chiron is integration of the fear, so that we can go with it and understand what freedom really is. It's not an escape from fear. It is accepting that the fear has a push, right? It's like the earthquake thing. This is why Uranus is like sudden, whereas Saturn is like stable. They're complete opposites, right? More than Jupiter and Saturn. They're both actually faith related, which is weird because when you say faith, it doesn't just mean faith or belief. It means like the stories in our head, right? This is part of the ego, the sun, that is saying, this is my perception of things. This is my story. This is what I believe things to be. My perception, right? One side of the human condition and conditioning is to go beyond the limits, to go beyond and explore. Because after Mars, you have Jupiter. Well, there's also the asteroid. We'll get into that in a different post, in a different video. But once you start to explore Mars, right, you start to go out and just go for it and just like, have that willpower to just go for things and like that sort of like, what do you call that? Go-getter sort of energy. Then it expands, right? So, but how will that expand unless you have Saturn there? So Jupiter has that sort of link with Saturn where they're both belief about exaggeration, so going beyond what is beyond, and then at the opposite of that. So Saturn actually has kind of like two opposites, Uranus and Jupiter, except that Jupiter is more about just keep going and going and going and going and not realizing that's like, okay, that's why Saturn is there. Saturn is like saying, whoa. Saturn is there to hold the reins. But once Saturn also becomes too much, then Uranus takes over. But before Uranus takes over, Chiron has to come into place. Okay, Chiron has to be that processor. Chiron helps us. Chiron is an asteroid technically, or is it what they call, not an asteroid, in astronomy they call, what do you call it? A centaur, obviously. But yeah, Chiron is a centaur. So these centaurs work as, they act as transitionary parts of the psyche, transitionary part of our experience. Call it the psyche, whatever it is. The point is it's part of our awareness and consciousness. Right? So they're all about transitions. I think even asteroids are the same thing. I'm not sure yet. So yeah. So Aaron also adds in later in the video, he says, fear is all in the head, right? That's what he realized. He said, it's all in my head. It actually ties in exactly what I said earlier. If it's all in your head, that means it's a perception, therefore a belief. Jupiter, Saturn. So, but one goes way out and one goes way in, right? So a belief of either or both release, in this case optimism, so Jupiter, and retraction, pessimism. So the point is that we can make use of our Saturnian selves, our inner Saturn, if you will, and really make it a part of our lives so that we can heal. That's part of the chironic healing process. You accept these limits, you accept the deaths, you accept the fears, you accept the karma that you have created, right? Karma is a choice. There is a purpose to it. Again, because of the duality, we can go either way, but depends on how our sense of awareness. But you know the saying we have, to each his own. I'm going to revamp that and call it to each time its own. So in other words, divine timing, right? When you allow for it, that's part of the whole process of being human. There's a reason why the planets are going sun first, right? It's the ego, all the way out. Because our awareness, as we grow in awareness, as we grow in consciousness, each individual experiences all that. Right? Today, as far as Sedna, yes, but most people don't even know what their own Pluto is. They don't know what that's like. They just know there's trauma. They don't know how to deal with it. Some people are stuck in their own inner Chiron and they don't know how to work past their fears. They're still processing it, so they don't feel free. And I probably have moments too where that's the case, and that's okay. The point is, that's okay. So anyways, I thought I'd just create this video. Yeah, that's all. Thanks for watching. I hope that was insightful. I don't know, it just came to me and I thought I'd post about it. So embrace your inner Saturn. And then go into Chiron, then go into Uranus. So enjoy. Thank you for watching.